I know there's exceptions, and I could share a whole bunch of pictures on that. It's the same thing. Here's a tip: you pick up a Filipino blade, let it speak to you. Think about this, the techniques of your system, and say, "Hey, could I use? Do I feel safe using this blade? Using the techniques I know?" If you don't, the techniques you use probably weren't designed for that blade.
Mm.
And the reason there's no hand guards on it is because there's techniques designed to not need it. And actually, there's some FMA systems that have techniques that not only do you not need a hand guard, but it shows you how to engage the other person's blade and actually attack someone who does have a hand guard.
Yeah. So obviously, there's
A lot of FMA has been modified because they became stick arts, and they got more modified because in certain regions they had traditional forms of sparring. And what they did is, if you look at their systems, the system is just filled with measure and techniques that are designed to dominate people within the traditional fighting method of what developed on their island or in their region.
Right. Oh, interesting.
I grew up in San Francisco, and there was a way to street box. And if you veered out of it, if I threw an elbow, if I threw a knee or leg, and I was a little guy, I just like to grab people and take them down. I'd have everybody on the playground or at the bus stop saying, "Look at that little Chinese kid. He's cheating. Yeah. He's cheating. He put his head, he let go of his head." But, so it would have been the same thing, except it's the Philippines. They throw rocks at you, and, they would beat you up when you're leaving town.
Wow.
So there's no hand guards because a lot of Filipino blades are not designed for blade-on-blade contact.
Mm.
And the fighting methods for those blades are not, they don't use those. And there's some stuff that still exists out there. Now, I'll just jump into the connection between Spanish. So I do want to touch on this. A lot of FMA, in my opinion, and I'm always willing to be proven wrong, is syncretic, meaning it's an amalgamation of different sources. Okay.
Mm.
Now, if you look at the documents around the Guardia Civil, and it specifically says, you cannot have a bladed weapon. And it describes that, it has a list of different types of bladed weapons. Exceptions: everybody can have a bolo. So it lists fighting blades is separate from bolos.
Okay.
What it goes on to say is, in areas that do not have the Guardia Civil, and originally only the greater Manila area, and then Luzon had the Guardia Civil, and then certain parts of Visayas, but the rest of the Philippines didn't have them. In areas that had bandits in the hills or Moros raiding on them or fear of that, they could keep their bladed weapons. And it said they need, and then for their quadrillos or their militias, they need to be armed. The alcalde needs to set aside funding for them to either have sabers or talibon, which is a native fighting blade. And it's a big question to why Taliban, right? I know people who speak the language are laughing at my accent. But so that was, you can see, and specifically in the 19th century, so before the Americans, Cebu was an area, I wish I could pull up the map, but basically Cebu was a huge hotbed for fighting the Moro. And in the 19th century, there was this huge, basically every town where you could actually see them and hear a cannon or see a fire being lit, there was another watchtower set. So basically, if someone saw the Moros, someone would send the signal, the fire would go up, just like in Lord of the Rings. Boom, the fire goes up. Then, the across the strait, and behold, the fire goes up. And then, all along the island, everybody knows, hey, there's 50 Moro Vintas, 50 Moro warboats in the area, and they were ready to fight the Moros.
Yeah.
So Cebu always had people with blades. Let me jump back over here. So someone asked, did it need to be hidden in dances and children's games? Torquay Dohilio and the Filipino Martial Arts Forum. It didn't need to be hidden, obviously, because like you want to hide stuff, just go walk for an hour. That's all the hiding you need to do.
Yeah.
But, and this is why, one of my things of like, this is part of the Spanish influence, formal teaching methods. Because my Salat instructor, he was from the Yakan tribe, Haji Ashir Tananjalan. He had a formal method for teaching Phil Salat, sports Salat, to the Philippine Salat team. And he wanted me to go through that to get conditioned. But then he also showed me how it used to be. And then explained a lot of this stuff, you just play games. Kids grow up just picking up these skills. Do this with the bolo. Do this with the bolo. Do this, wrestle like this. Do like that. It was informal. We're in lockdown because of COVID. I barely leave my house. And it's just too much energy. Like I'm teaching my kid geometry. We're learning foreign language. I got 2 boys. Some of the stuff I got to be organized about it. But when it comes to the martial arts, like, hey, we're going to do this today. Let me show them one thing. Okay, go play. Go do that. And then actually, one group I got a lot of good information from in the United States was the bridge generation. These are the children of the Manongs. So these are folks who are now 70, 80 years old, born and raised in the United States. Not a lot of them speak any Visayan or Ilocano, but their stories of what it was like growing up in the work camps. And in the Visayan camps, all of them were forced like, hey, you go play with sticks. You spar like this, And then someone like, okay, I show you this technique. I show you that technique. But going back to tribal methods, I've heard about Igorot methods. I've heard about different moral methods. A lot of it was just like this osmosis learning over a lifetime. And then you go participate in fighting and hunting and those different types of things. A set up curriculum of like, hey, this is what you're going to learn in 3 months. And I'm into pedagogy, and that's a whole different conversation. Pedagogy is the way you pass on knowledge from one human being to another generation. Okay. There's a lot of structures that for me, they match Spanish methods. Certain things like vocabulary. Well, let me jump back to this thing. Also in the Guardia Civil documents, they talk about you're not supposed to travel more than 6 leagues. That's 6 hours. You have to have a passport if you were beyond that. And if they, the Guardia Civil and then also the locals, they knew everybody in the area. So, you could get locked up if you weren't the right end, you didn't have a passport. So people weren't going around to different islands. There's exceptions, traders and that type of thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It wasn't as common as people would think, during Spanish times. And so, and that's also why you have these separate languages to this day, because they weren't interacting with each other. Now you had,
there would have been kind of a blending of the languages, right?
Yeah, and now you have and then you have certain cities in the past, and there's only 2 places where it still exists: Cavite in the north and Zamboanga in the south, where there's actually a pidgin Spanish, Chavacano, that because you had so many people from different parts of the Philippines, they had to speak Spanish as a lingua franca. And that's how they communicated to each other. Okay. And that language still exists to this day. So then how did all of a sudden did martial arts, people always think like, oh, there's a huge difference between Luzon and Visayas in Mindanao. But you're going to have, in certain systems, similar terms, all the best. I mean, some of them are a lot of them have some of the same terminology, but a lot of them have angles of attack, uh, counters to the angles. That type of teaching method, possibly from the Spanish. And I'd say for me, I think it's highly probable. And then what else do I say about that? In the back of my head, I'm thinking about all the different people who got good reasons to argue against that with me. But term like all the best, which is found in the Luzon, but also found in the Visayas. How did it transfer back and forth in both of those areas? Quick, easy answer is, well, where were Visayan troops usually stationed? In Luzon. Where were Luzon troops usually stationed? In the Visayas and Mindanao. So it got spread by those who were in the military. So there's going to be, people, the typical service in the military was 5 years. There's plenty of people who retired after 20 years. It's like, hey, there's going to be some exchange of information and knowledge.
Absolutely.
Sure, at some point, like, hey, let's do some, rattan sword fencing. Let's do some eskrima. Let me jump to questions on here. Someone asked, are there recorded duels between natives and the Spanish? What were the outcomes? I haven't read any. And then here's also, you look at society at the time. Poor people got in fights. The elites had duels. And hey, these were Spaniards. Some of them, I'd probably say the great majority probably, looked down on the native Filipinos. They wouldn't get into a duel with the native Filipino.
Right. That was
You might have seen mestizos getting into duels with each other, or a mestizo getting into duels with Indios. So, you had the Peninsular. I'm not even going to bother saying it right now. But these are Spaniards born in Spain. Then it meant different things at different times. But Filipinos, for most of the Spanish colonial period, referred to Spaniards born in the Philippines, and they were a tiny part. Most Spaniards, after they spent, their term of service, they went back to Spain or Mexico or wherever they were from. They didn't stay in the Philippines. And then you had the mestizos. I think today it's like less than 3%, 5% of the population have Spanish blood. And it's because they didn't intermarry. And the reason why it's actually so high is where it happened more was Spaniards intermarrying with Chinese, and Chinese intermarrying with native Filipinos. And so you have this huge Chinese mestizo class. But here's what people also don't realize. That entire Chinese mestizo class all became Spaniards within that society. So if you looked at them from the outside, they were no longer Chinese. They were no longer, Indio. They were now Spanish citizens within that culture. And then, there's still constraints because they weren't Spanish and they weren't Indio. But they found this nice little middle class niche, Another question, Alvin Albano on the Filipino Martial Arts Forum asked about weapons ban. I read about 5 of them in the 18th century. All of them eventually got rescinded. Why? Because, the church and the military had to take care of the Indios. It was part of their mandate. And they were getting attacked by bandits and, sea raiders. They're like, hey, they need to defend themselves, give them back their weapons. And then later on, it got more specified about where you could and where you couldn't have weapons. But there were always Filipinos in different parts of the Philippines who had weapons. And once again, I talked about all those other groups. All you had to do was go an hour out of town, keep all your weapons. It wasn't like a big deal.
Yeah.
Let's see. Dominic John from the Philippine Martial Arts Forum asked, how was Espada Idaga adopted and transmuted by Filipinos from the Spanish. Now, this changed just in preparing for this talk, because I really thought, okay, this is something that the Spanish were famous for.
Right.
And I still think, like, there were Spanish who came with sword and dagger. Filipinos in service to Spain saw it, they replicated it and copied it, and incorporated it. But what I recently read was forget when Sultan Kolderat was. I think it's 17th century, but it was the first priest who set up forts and taught Filipinos how to fight against Moros. But he mentioned what I said is he went to a place after. It was actually really interesting. He engaged in all these battles with the locals, but then later on went back and befriended the Moros. And it shows about this time where he went out at this later time, and the next thing he knew is him and his small group was surrounded by 50 Moros all on horseback, with spears. And then it mentioned a bunch of them having, Chris and dagger, Campilan and dagger, or shields. And I'm like, point being is Filipinos carried sword and dagger also, outside of the Spanish influence. So I think it happened. I think it might be one of those, and I'm just going to share a hypothesis. And the hypothesis, can be proven wrong. If you're researching, keep creating hypotheses and things. But one of my hypotheses is this syncretic martial art that existed in the military and got passed on by people serving the military, got shared at different times. It came at different times. So you probably had stuff that came from the Spanish, from the Scream Macamun. Possibly some of the Destreza concepts got shared. But this is something that would have been kept separate by those Filipinos who served in the military, watched the Spaniards come and go, but they kept it amongst the enlisted and the officers while there were still Filipino officers. By the 19th century, they changed a lot of things, and I don't think we have time, but I could go on about how much it changed after. I'm not even going to open up that door. I'm just going to answer questions.
Yeah. Plus, we got that Christmas, the Christmas special coming up with. So we could, save it for them.
So, Raimundo Valdez Lucero on the FMA discussion board goes, what are examples of a cultural appropriation FMA? Why is it still promoted in this day and age? I kind of know what he's talking about. You got different systems in Filipino martial arts. And some of them are, to the outside eye, they look really simplistic. Like, that's all they do? They just move out of the way and hit to the hand after? That's so simple. A child can figure that out. Or I saw things and I thought, oh, that's just a trick. This is how you defend against it. When I first went to the Philippines, I had my system. My system was the best in the world. And I just want to go to the Philippines. I want to meet some of the old guys, but I want to find out about the history of my lineage. And I'm 23. And then I meet guys 60s and 70s. And they make all my shit not work. In fact, these guys use a technique that I thought was bullshit. And I can't touch these guys with it. So there's something of like that skill set. So how does that go back to what Ramon's talking about? At that same time period, because it's already the 90s, people in the Philippines were already seeing Dan Inosanto tapes. They also knew about Doce Pares. They knew about Edgar Salite. They knew about, hey, we want to get foreign students. We want them to come to the Philippines, and I want to help out my family by teaching stuff. But they had to develop bigger curriculum. So all of a sudden, you had, legitimate badass masters adding to the curriculums. Sometimes they made up their whole curriculum themselves. Sometimes, like I saw stuff, I'm like, you guys are telling me this is a traditional method from your province? dude, that's tape 5 of, Dan and Santos' third series. And I know you can buy that at Squadron Shop, you
Uh,
know, but I understand why they do that. And people got to survive. It's not
yeah,
easy
sure.
being poor in the Philippines, So that's one kind
Yeah.
of appropriation. And then, there's plenty of stories of other Filipino marshals where it's like they did the same thing, but there are systems that hate each other to this day because they don't acknowledge this came from here or that came from there. And I've seen
Mm,
the other thing. I've been accused of, systems that I do have been accused of like, hey, you stole that from here. And the old way would be like, well, yeah, let's fight about it. But, and I'm not going to go there. I'll be civil and shut my mouth.
yeah, yeah.
But what happens which is upsetting for different groups in the Philippines, is seeing stuff made up in the United States. And they say made up, but you got to realize these Filipino Americans, or sometimes now it's American foreigner students, are using the terms of stuff made up by Filipino Americans or those manongs who made up that stuff.
Mm,
Who, once again, going back, they only learned for 3 months, 6 months, a year. You know, these guys had sixth grade educations, if that. And so the conjugation, and here's another thing is, they're like, oh, that's bad Tagalog or that's bad Visayan. Well, some of these people, Cebuano wasn't their native language. Maybe Ilonggo or Waray was their native language.
mm,
So their conjugation is weird and funky, especially if they're speaking using a Tagalog word or Visayan word. So why is it off? Because it's spoken language and it doesn't fit the grammar standards of Cebuanos of 2020. You know, they actually spoke a different language. 93, when I went to travel all around the Visayas, everywhere I went, the tricycle drivers, people in restaurants spoke, I could always find people who are totally fluent in English. And these are young people in their 20s. I go there now in 2020, people of that age, they can't speak English anymore.
really?
When I went there in 93, I would actually people like, please, sir, if that, or they just say, don't do that. I'm like, don't do what? Don't speak Tagalog here. You're Amboy, just speak English. Nowadays, because of the education, everybody speaks Filipino. And I was like shocked to see that's now a lingua franca in different areas where if the people don't speak Visayan or Waray or something, they're going to speak Filipino. And that's like, things can change fast like that. So, going back to America, what's really upsetting is the idea of like here in the Philippines, we really want to separate like, hey, no, that's an ignorant system. That's not part of the methods that were part of the Christian Filipinos. All that stick clicking and stuff, that's not part of the moral method. So don't call it that. If you did that, there should be a lineage. We should know who it is. People knew each other. They talked. They're still known in the community. And in those cultures, I'll say the ones that I know, I'm only connected to people in Tausug lineages, and then my connection to Yakan. They know lineages that go back several generations. They know the people.
Yeah.
Sort of like, I never heard of that. That's weird. That's off. They'll be polite about it, but behind closed doors, like, I think that's bullshit. So that's where it becomes an issue. Someone asked, it was Julius Vladimir Francisco, how does FMA differ between port towns and closest to the ocean versus inland or non-conquered tribes? I hope by now you realize it's really going to be specific to each town. That whole thing of Luzon is called this and Visayas is called that. No, that's BS. There's certain parts of the Visayas where it's all called Arnis. It's been called Arnis for a while. There's places in Luzon where it's still called, it was called Scream. It was called, I think but if I talk back most of it, if you go back far, I don't know how and why. I mean, there's different stories, but I'm looking for actual more documented proof. I still don't understand why Arnis became the term used. And I won't talk about the harness thing. And so this also goes back to this question. So what are the differences between FM styles and Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao? Really? If you want to know that, you got to go spend time with people who know systems from those areas. I've gotten in trouble when I try to make generalities about this is how the systems are from Cebu, because then you'll find someone pull out something from Cebu that's like, okay, you're right, that's different. So variety is the spice of life. One of the stories about Filipino cuisine is you have your different dishes that come out to the table, but there's also garlic chopped up. There might be scallions, depending on where you're from, maybe wansoy, coriander, pepper, patis, different things. And why is that there? So you can make your own little dipping sauce, or you can put more of an acidity or salty to it. Why? Because you eat communally, but you personalize it to yourself. So that's where Filipino culture, you can make this general, is pretty communal, but there's this personalization. And then there's always this thing of like, I want to set up my own tribe. So you know, we see this all the time. It's like, even while the grandmaster's still alive, it's like you got 4 different lineages and they look quite different. It can change that quickly. So if that's happening out now, why wouldn't it happen that way back then? One reason why is because there was less. Now we're doing it as a martial art. Back then it was for survival. So you're not going to just like, oh, let's try this out. Like, okay, you go test it out in battle.
No more at stake.
That's a little bit different. But when you're a child and you're learning the stuff, you do all that playing and experimentation then. But then you'll get, you know, progressively tested by your elders. And then like, okay, now you're ready to go participate in raids or battles. And, you know, as late as the 19th century, one example, 1851, there's a Father Ibanez, and let me pull up, because I have a photo of this. I mean, not a photo, an illustration. Let me see if I can find that thing. Oh, man, where is that? Okay, here it is. Cool. I'm going to blow up the image real quick.
Okay.
So check out this image. So this is Father Ibanez. One interesting thing, in the 19th century, there was a number of priests who were given the title Padre Capitan, because they set up forts, they set up, and this is one of them. It's actually listed that he trained Cebuanos to do battle. And he actually led a division of Filipinos. I don't know if division is the right term, but I've read 600, 500, and 250. So once again, you got to check the different sources. But he trained and led these Visayans into battle in Jolo, which also was part of a larger Spanish force. So you can see the regular force. But he said something like, when you see me die, that means you'll win. So that's what he said. And he actually led the charge over the wall. He got shot. And then, you know, his Visayan warriors came and got him and then brought him out. Now, I'll just share this for some, because like it's proven, you know, should be in no doubt that the Spanish did train Filipinos in their combat methods, but it didn't necessarily mean swordsmanship. It's documented that they did swordsmanship. 19th century saber. I think if you're fighting together, why wouldn't you teach and share this stuff? If, you know, especially if you're in an area where like you're the only Spaniard or one of the few Spaniards, you know, give them, you know, techniques. And if they're better than you, learn from the Filipinos, you know. But in this particular case, I was shocked to find out, and this was something I said I promised. What was the most common weapon used in combat during Spanish colonial times? The spear. William Henry Scott wrote about that. If you look at the different vocabularios, the dictionaries, and the many languages, over 200 different words associated with spears. Spears for baptismal, spears for the harvest, spears. I mean, all these different terms, and then all these different names for the different parts of the spear. That was the main weapon, and I showed that that illustration of the quadrillo using spears, fighting spear and shield. And even though in this illustration it shows the Filipinos with rifles, what it said in the different counts is the Visayans went to battle with shield and spear.
Shield and spear. Wow.
Yeah. And when and when the Kapampangans helped the Spanish when the British came, and the largest I saw, and there was like 10,000 of them, which seems like crazy and extraordinary. Their main weapon was either spears or sharpened bamboo spears, so it had no iron tip. So that's the main weapon. And where is it in FMA today? I only know of a handful of systems. I know of an Ilocano system. I know of a Cebuano system. I've heard about a few others. The only other place you can find spear work still kept alive is in Moro Igorot in Lumad groups.
Okay.
Or reinvention. Just want to share this image here. Talk about quadrillos. So the illustration I showed at the beginning, that was probably like Cagayan. So northern Philippines. This is also northern Philippines. This is, it says an Ilocano merchant, which would be this guy here. But looking at this, I'm assuming this is a quadrillo, but I don't know that for a fact. But I've had other people researchers tell me, no, the blue pants and the white shirt, and the fact that he has a spear and a sword, that has to be a quadrillo, quadrillero. And then we have this image here, which is from Manila. You can see it's actually quadrillo. And look, we have the spear, but look, we have a spotty daga. Here's the daga. And then we have, a European style sword. Yeah, at this time period, and also we have to assume this guy ate a lot of spinach. Look at those forearms. Yeah. But this definitely looks like a pointy stabby weapon. So this speaks to the probability or possibility of, if you're using a weapon like that, then you're using a stabbing system. And when there was more of the old guys around in the 90s, they talked about like, oh yeah, we banned stabbing from our tournaments because, one, it's dangerous. It could slip under the thing and hit someone in the throat. But the other thing is, it's European. It looks European. So that was still part of the community knowledge back then. And how would they know that unless they were seeing that stuff? And then there's systems that still keep alive some super gnarly stabbing techniques. And if you never felt like annoying as hell to like get stabbed in your hand and your forearm and your foot and stuff. Let's see. I kind of covered the stuff here. Were there any other online questions that you wanted to address or jump on?
I think. Let me just double check here. A spear. Julius in the it's going back a couple questions, but if you just want to maybe just give a little more on this. Julius says, I wasn't not talking about the name, but the differences in methodology with regards to his question. which was the differences between the islands, the FMA, what have you. So I guess what you'd like to know is the differences in methodology.
Okay. Uh,
I mean,
I
if
just looking, I was just checking Facebook and someone sent me I see. Oh wait, there we go. Someone sent me this image of policeman in Cebu. I actually had it right. This is Cebuano policeman circa 1900. So this is already American colonial period. I'm assuming these are former Guardia Civil. So you can see them carrying, you know, Cebuano blades.
oh wow, yeah,
And looking at the uniform, that matches Guardia Civil uniforms of the time. I can pull up another image of, wait, where is Guardia Civil? Anyway, so I'm not going to make generalities about the arts. You know, okay. Here's what I could say. One thing that, because this is historical, and I think it's important to know, the Visayas had Huego Todo, and one of the ways that they started fights was in what we would call quarto range. Now,
mm,
you touch part of their body with your live hand, and the stick
yeah,
is touching.
right. So
So
yeah,
of
no,
course you're going to develop. You were developing a method to fight where you start at that level. You're going to, and it would, like, as soon as they go or laban, you fight from there.
yeah,
So there's methods that are highlighted for that.
you blend
Okay.
along.
Now you go to the first time I heard about the fight circuit in the Laguna de Bay area near Metro Manila was 97. I got to meet an old man who hadn't picked up a stick in 50 years. I knew this squatter who was a Yao Yang guy. And anyway, his family was squatting there, and he became friends, drinking buddies with this old tricycle driver who, as a child, watched the last Fiesta Arnis matches in what's now Tagaytay.
Mm,
And he said, the real master's dead, but there's still one left. So we set it up. We rented a jeepney and drove up to the Gaitai, and then went there, went to the old man's house. And like the children were like, what's going on? And then like they're translating because my Tagalog was non existent at the time. Um, and they're like, what? He doesn't stick fight. Please just ask him and tell him, and, and then the tricycle driver reintroduced himself. He says, sir, I remember seeing you. You were so good. And what I did remember, he said, hindi maari, which means it's not possible. He said, I haven't picked up a stick in 50 years. My children don't even know I know this. And so I said, so I asked if I could, I said, well, we came all the way here. Can I demonstrate what I know? So I had my friend deliver some angles of attack to me. And he's sitting there, and it was literally like Yoda in episode 3, or was it episode 2 of Star Wars? He's like all tired. And then he goes in Tagalog, that won't work. Stands up. And he says, let me show you what I would do against all that. And, then through interpreters, asked him about it. And he talked about, which towns around in Laguna, in Cavite, and in Rizal that he would actually go and fight in. And he talked about the towns where and there were prizes. Like if you won the prize, the biggest prizes, like that would feed you and your family for a month. You could walk out of town with a pig. So that was like, that was huge back then, right?
mm,
And anyway, point being is you might start with the sticks touching, but as they break, you could step back and then you work your way in. And then the matches went to first blood or saying I quit. So in that area, then you're using a largo mano method, and that's connected to, I don't mind talking about, because that's connected to a cultural tradition that actually lived there, and it's kept alive still in Paite. In Paite also has some different forms of sparring. Other parts of Visayas have other methods that were community that were known in the region where, in the American. Here's another thing. I've been talking just about the Spanish period. There are other people who are much more knowledgeable. I mean, I know stuff, but people are much more knowledgeable about what happened in specific lineages that happened during the American colonial period.
Yeah,
Because what we have today
yeah,
is filtered through the American colonial experience. You can't just jump from Spanish times to now.
no. Matter of fact, we're having somebody come on. I think that's going to partially cover that. I believe it's in the works anyhow.
I could keep going, but I'm also like wondering about the time. I don't know what time it is for people in the part.
Because what I mean, not to give it away, but there's going to be a significant collaboration come Christmas time. With a couple of people that I already mentioned during the first part and all that. And basically, it's going to be 4 historians coming together. So, again, a little, definitely in the future, but something to look forward to. But it's going to be, again, 4 people. And it's just going to be on history. And that's going to be Christmas. So, that's going to be incredibly fascinating. Again, some of the people were kind of mentioned already. So, no, but this is fantastic. So what I got to do is I got to go back to.
I'm actually reading through the questions now. So I see Julius, Vladimir, Francisco. Yeah. Peninsulares. I know the word. I just can't pronounce it. But he's asking about differences in methodology.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Like, the only reason I'm speaking about it is because I'm tying it to a community practice. But systems have their own unique stuff there, and really, it's like if you get on one level, for me, it actually lives almost disrespectful to make generalities.
I know, yeah.
I still do, and I've done it forever. But there really is. If you see certain commonalities, there's a reason for it, but you're also going to find exceptions,
Yeah.
And there's going to be differences between, like, Waray arts and, Ilonggo and Cebuano.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So, anything else? Or do you want me to cover it?
Yeah, I think it was fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back. I'm going to download the first part and then this part here, and I'll kind of see what I can play around with. But regardless of how I get through it, I'm definitely, when I put them on YouTube, I'll throw them on your, obviously tag you and put them on your wall, So.
I'm taking a look at one. Okay, I'm just seeing one other question someone sent to me.
What's that?
I'm just looking at some more questions.
Okay.
Okay, so since I'm talking about the Spanish period, I want to end with saying, like, indigenous methods were preserved. You don't throw away something that works. If I go back to my first slide, hold on. Look, we got a traditional person from Gagayan. If you're going to fight this guy, you're going to have to get past 2 spears that he's going to try to throw and hit you with. And I'm just going to throw up another image just real quick because I think it's relevant to this. Oh, where the hell is that image? This is from a different. I think I mentioned this is the guy who was traveling Where the hell is the? Okay, I'm just gonna jump through these real quick. This is all from the same French book. Where is that darn? Ah, there it is. I've read German and this French account. Basically, the 19th century, there were still so many deer that it's almost like a tourist attraction for Europeans. They would take them out and they would actually hunt deer with throwing spears from horseback.
Oh, okay.
But if you look at the length of the spears, it's because they could actually run the deer down and stab it from the horse.
Much like the Plains Indian. Okay, okay.
Yeah. I don't remember why I even brought that up or why my mind went there. Oh, but I guess it's going back to this. So the spear was still the main thing. But if somehow you got past the two throwing spears and then he's fighting you with the spear and shield because everybody was well versed in that, who was from actually pretty much everybody knew the spear. You still had to get past his utility blade. Yeah, and he had a shield.
And a shield. Yeah.
So that's another thing. How many FMA systems are actually teaching a lineal tradition of shield techniques?
Very little.
So indigenous methods existed even in the Christian areas. Of course, outside, and you only have to take an hour to go out of town. But we know that 19th century Spaniards taught saber techniques to certain groups. I can show other pictures, but I don't want to keep going on. But it's like they had different blades, different methods. But I assume is if they're going to assign troops an actual weapon that they're wearing, and they had actually different uniforms. They had dress uniform, field uniform. I can't remember the other uniform. But they had a sword with each one of them. So it's like, you're going to have them go into the field without some basic training. So there was something that had to be passed on. Then we go back as far as early as the 17th century. We have records of people serving the military for a decade plus. It's going to have exposure to swordsmanship in there. That could have become part of something that can continue to this day. And then in areas where you didn't have a lot of Spaniards other than the priest or the alcalde, if they were, and you got actually, a number of Filipino, they're not a lot, but a few of them, Filipino blades with an actual guard, and you don't have, a guard is because you're actually doing blade on blade contact. But some of those blades are also designed to not have blade on blade contact. It's a whole separate conversation. But point being is the Spanish did actually teach group combat to Filipinos. They did it with spears. They did it with a lot with firearms. They did it with cannons on board ships and then out of forts. So why wouldn't they spend some time on like, hey, if you have to use your bolo, learn this. And I'm also going to search like they also had their own methods. So it's like, now you guys are good. Or the Spaniard might like, hey, can you show me? You're the only Spaniard in town. Wouldn't you want to learn something?
Of course.
So I don't think people understand the relations, because you can read these different stories about this congenial, good relationship. And it's funny, in one century, the Augustinians sound like the coolest order in all the Philippines. In another century, I'm like, these are assholes. They're greedy, evil, manipulative. And then you'll see that with, at one time it's the church, taking care of the natives. Another time, it could be decades later, they're the ones who are messing, because it comes down to individuals messing with the structures in place. So it's never black and white with the Philippines. That's what I'd leave people with. And, go research stuff. Have fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was fantastic, and I appreciate you coming on and all that. I thought it was fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, just to let people know, this whole history kind of these episodes, it's not ending. Like I said, I have one more person coming up, and then come around the holidays, it's going to be a big slam dunk with bringing 4 people on. We just got to get Zoom straightened out, but yeah. So, but yeah, I'm going to download these, and again, once I get them down on YouTube, I'll definitely, tag you, of course, and send them to your wall. But I want to thank you so much for doing this. I know you. I appreciate you put a lot of time, research, and what have you. You've been up a good chunk of the day, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome, Steph.
And we'll.
Take care, Dean.
Yeah, you too. All right, get some sleep.
I've had so much coffee. I don't think I'm sleeping yet. But have a good one.
All right, you
I'm gonna
too.
go hydrate.
All right, take care.
Bye, guys.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So yeah, unfortunately, I had to put those 2 episodes together. For those of you watching, the first one just went out with no rhyme or reason, and not sure what happened there. And I will over the weekend. I'm gonna let who's coming up next week. I'm thinking I want somebody on Tuesday and Friday. Trisha is gonna be Friday, so we got another female from practitioner from Canada, Trisha Dawn. Really good. She's with the KC Ice and Louis Lindo up there. Some really great instructors that she's under. So that's gonna be nice to hear from her. Like I said, the goal's always been trying to get more women on here. So by all means, if you know some and all that, I mean, please let me know. I definitely want to get more female voices on here and all that. So with that being said, I want to thank you for those who tuned in and all that. If you haven't already, please hit like and subscribe to FMA Discussion on YouTube. And I will see you all next week. Thank you.